The spring wind carried the scent of wildflowers through the open window of Elijah Rawlings' modest cabin as he stared hopelessly at his 7-year-old daughter's tangled auburn hair. His large, calloused hands hovered uncertainly over Sarah's head, the fine-toothed comb clutched awkwardly between his fingers. It had been 3 months since his wife Martha had died of tuberculosis, leaving him alone to raise their little girl in the unforgiving Colorado territory of 1876. And still, the simplest of tasks like combing his daughter's hair felt as impossible as moving mountains. "Pa! It hurts," Sarah whimpered as he made another clumsy attempt to pull the comb through a particularly stubborn knot. "I know, darling. I'm trying," Elijah sighed, feeling the weight of his inadequacy pressing down on him. At 32 years of age, he was skilled at breaking horses, tracking game, and building shelter, but the delicate art of caring for a little girl's hair remained beyond his grasp. "I miss Mama," Sarah said, her lower lip trembling. "She never pulled my hair." Elijah's heart clenched painfully. "I miss her too, sweetheart, more than I can say." He set the comb down on the rough-hewn table and knelt before his daughter. Her eyes, the same deep green as Martha's, were brimming with tears. "Tell you what, why don't we leave your hair for today? We need to get to town for supplies anyway." Sarah nodded, clearly relieved to be free from his fumbling attempts. Elijah helped her with her boots and coat, secured his gun belt around his waist, and together they set out for the small settlement of Pine Creek, a half-hour ride from their homestead. The main street of Pine Creek was bustling with the usual Saturday morning activity when they arrived. Elijah lifted Sarah from their chestnut mare and tied the horse to the hitching post outside the general store. They were halfway up the steps when a sudden gust of wind blew Sarah's hat from her head, sending it tumbling down the street. "My hat!" she cried, darting after it. The hat rolled and danced in the wind, coming to rest at the feet of a woman Elijah had never seen before. She stooped gracefully to pick it up, and as she straightened, Elijah found himself looking into the warmest brown eyes he'd ever seen. "I believe this belongs to you," the woman said, smiling as she approached Sarah. She was dressed in a simple blue calico dress, her dark hair neatly pinned beneath a modest bonnet. Something about the way she carried herself spoke of quiet dignity and strength. "Thank you, madam," Sarah said shyly, accepting her hat. The woman's gaze moved from Sarah's face to her tangled hair, her expression softening with understanding rather than judgment. "My, what beautiful hair you have. Such a lovely color." Sarah's hand went self-consciously to her head. Pa tried to comb it, but it got all knotted up. The woman glanced up at Elijah, who had come to stand behind his daughter, and there was kindness in her eyes that made his chest tighten strangely. "He forgot to comb my hair yesterday, too," Sarah continued, "and the day before. Mama used to do it, but she's in heaven now." A shadow of compassion crossed the woman's face. "I'm so sorry to hear that, sweetheart." Elijah felt heat rise to his face. "I'm afraid hair combing isn't my strong suit," he admitted, extending his hand. "Elijah Rawlings, this is my daughter, Sarah." "Delilah Porter," she replied, her hand warm and sure in his. "I just moved to town last month. I'm staying at my sister's place while I get settled." There was a brief hesitation in her voice that made Elijah wonder about her story. Sarah was studying Delilah intently. "Your hair's pretty. It's not all tangled like mine." Delilah laughed softly, the sound like music in the dusty street. "Well, I've had years of practice." She knelt down to Sarah's level. "Tell you what, if your pa doesn't mind, I could help you with your hair right now." Sarah's eyes lit up, and she looked up at her father hopefully. "That's mighty kind of you, Mrs. Porter, but I wouldn't want to impose," Elijah said, though the relief at the prospect of someone else tackling his daughter's hair was palpable. "It's Miss Porter," Delilah corrected gently, "or rather, Mrs. Porter again. I'm a widow." Her eyes betrayed a flash of old pain before she smiled again. "And it's no imposition at all." "Please, Pa," Sarah pleaded. Elijah looked from his daughter's hopeful face to Delilah's kind one and felt something shift inside him. "Well, if you're sure." Delilah nodded. "Come here, sweetheart, let me try," she said, holding out her hand to Sarah. My sister's house is just down the street. We can get you fixed up, and then you and your pa can go about your business. Sarah slipped her small hand into Delilah's without hesitation. Elijah followed them to a neat white clapboard house with blue shutters at the end of the street. A small sign by the door read, Porter's Millinery and Dressmaking. My sister Rebecca owns the shop, Delilah explained as she opened the door. She's away visiting our brother in Denver, so I'm minding things while she's gone. The interior was warm and inviting, with bolts of fabric stacked neatly on shelves and half-finished hats and dresses displayed around the room. Delilah led them through to a sitting area at the back, where a kettle was steaming on a small stove. Would you like some coffee, Mr. Rawlings? I just made a fresh pot, she offered. That'd be mighty welcome, thank you, and please call me Elijah. Elijah, she repeated with a small smile, and for some reason, the sound of his name on her lips made his heart beat a little faster. While Delilah prepared the coffee, Sarah wandered around the room, admiring the colorful fabrics and ribbons. Elijah watched as Delilah moved efficiently around the small space, noting the graceful line of her neck and the way the light caught the hints of copper in her dark hair. She was not a young girl, perhaps in her late 20s, and there was a depth to her that spoke of experiences both joyful and sorrowful. Here you are, she said, handing him a steaming mug before turning to Sarah. Now, let's see what we can do about that hair. Come sit here by me. Sarah climbed onto a chair, and Delilah positioned herself behind her. From a nearby drawer, she produced a bottle of hair oil and a wide-toothed comb. The trick is to start from the bottom and work your way up, she explained, looking at Elijah as she gently began to comb the ends of Sarah's hair. And a little oil helps the comb slide through more easily. Elijah watched, amazed at the patience and gentleness with which Delilah worked. She talked softly to Sarah the whole time, telling her about the birds that visited her window each morning and asking about Sarah's favorite games. Not once did Sarah wince or complain, even as Delilah tackled the most daunting tangles. Where did you learn to do that? He asked, genuinely curious. Delilah's hands paused briefly. I had a daughter, she said quietly. Emma. She passed away last year along with my husband, influenza. Elijah felt a pang of shared grief. I'm sorry. My Martha tuberculosis took her 3 months ago. Their eyes met over Sarah's head, and in that moment, a silent understanding passed between them, an acknowledgement of the hollow spaces grief had carved into their lives. It doesn't get easier, Delilah said softly, but we learn to carry it differently after a while. Elijah nodded, unable to speak past the sudden tightness in his throat. By the time Delilah had finished, Sarah's hair was smooth and shining, neatly braided down her back with a blue ribbon woven through it. There, Delilah said, holding up a small mirror for Sarah to see. What do you think? Sarah's face lit up with delight. It looks just like how Mama used to do it. She threw her arms around Delilah's neck. Thank you. Delilah's eyes glistened as she returned the hug. You're very welcome, sweetheart. Elijah cleared his throat, oddly moved by the scene. We should let Miss Porter get back to her work, Sarah. We've taken enough of her time. Oh, it was no trouble at all, Delilah assured him. In fact, she hesitated, then continued. If you'd like, I could show you how to do it. For next time. The offer caught Elijah off guard. You'd do that? Of course. I remember how hard it was for my husband to learn these things after, well, when it was just the two of them for a while before I lost them both. A shadow crossed her face, but she pushed it aside. Every girl deserves to have her hair properly combed. Something about her generosity and understanding touched Elijah deeply. That would be mighty helpful, Miss Porter. Please call me Delilah. Delilah, he repeated, the name feeling right on his tongue. As they prepared to leave, Elijah found himself reluctant to go. Perhaps we could stop by again next week? I'd be happy to pay you for the lesson. Delilah shook her head firmly. No payment necessary. But yes, I'd be glad to see you both again. Outside on the street, Sarah skipped ahead, admiring her reflection in the store windows. Elijah turned back to see Delilah watching them from her doorway. She raised her hand in a small wave, and he tipped his hat in response, a curious warmth spreading through his chest despite the cool spring air. For the first time since Martha's death, Elijah felt a glimmer of something he had thought buried with his wife, Hope. Perhaps they would indeed be back next week. And perhaps, just perhaps, there was more to learn from Delilah Porter than just how to comb his daughter's hair. True to his word, Elijah brought Sarah back to Delilah's the following Saturday. This time, he brought a small bundle of wildflowers he and Sarah had picked on the way, tied with a piece of twine. "They're not much," he said, suddenly self-conscious as he handed them to Delilah. "But Sarah thought you might like them." Delilah's face brightened as she accepted the humble bouquet. "They're beautiful. Thank you both," she bent to Sarah's level. "Would you like to help me put them in water?" While Sarah and Delilah arranged the flowers in a blue ceramic jar, Elijah took in the changes in the shop since their last visit. New dresses were displayed on forms, their designs both practical and pretty. He noticed a small photograph on a side table, a man and a little girl, both smiling. Delilah's family, he guessed. "Your husband?" he asked when she returned from settling Sarah with some colored pencils and paper. Delilah nodded, a gentle sadness in her eyes. "Thomas and our Emma. She was 6 when..." She trailed off, then squared her shoulders. "But you didn't come here to listen to sad stories. You came for a hair-combing lesson." Over the next hour, Delilah patiently showed Elijah how to section Sarah's hair, how to hold the comb properly, and how to work through tangles without causing pain. His large hands felt clumsy at first, but Delilah was an encouraging teacher. "You're doing wonderfully," she assured him, when he finally managed to comb through a section without Sarah protesting. "It just takes practice." "You make it look so easy," he said, attempting a simple braid and failing miserably. Delilah laughed, the sound warming the room. "I've had years of practice. You'll get there." She guided his hands, her fingers occasionally brushing against his, sending unexpected shivers up his arms. By the time they finished, Sarah's hair was neatly combed but somewhat unevenly braided. Still, it was progress, and Sarah beamed with pride at her father's accomplishment. "Would you like to stay for lunch?" Delilah offered. "Nothing fancy, just some soup and biscuits." The invitation surprised and pleased Elijah. "We don't want to impose. You wouldn't be. Truth be told, I get lonely sometimes. It would be nice to have company." The honesty in her admission touched him. "Then we'd be happy to stay." The simple meal turned into an afternoon of conversation. Elijah learned that Delilah had come to Pine Creek after her husband and daughter died, unable to bear staying in the home they had shared in Kansas. Her sister had offered her a place to stay and work in the shop until she figured out her next steps. In turn, Elijah told her about his homestead, about meeting Martha when they were both barely 20, about their dreams of building a life in the West. He spoke of his struggles since her death, not just with Sarah's hair, but with cooking, keeping house, and helping his daughter through her grief while managing his own. "The hardest part," he confessed, "is the nights. After Sarah's asleep, the silence is overwhelming." Delilah nodded, understanding in her eyes. "I used to talk to Thomas even after he was gone. I still do sometimes. Does that sound foolish?" "Not at all. I do the same with Martha." As the afternoon light began to fade, Elijah reluctantly announced that they needed to head home before dark. "Thank you for everything," he said at the door. "Not just the hair lesson, but for understanding." "You're welcome any time," Delilah replied softly. "Both of you." Over the following weeks, those visits became a regular part of their lives. Sometimes Elijah would bring Sarah for another hair lesson, and sometimes he would come alone, offering to help Delilah with repairs around the shop or just bringing small gifts, a jar of honey from his beehives, a wooden bird he had carved during the long evenings. One rainy afternoon in late April, he arrived unexpectedly, soaked to the skin and looking troubled. "Elijah, what's wrong?" "Where's Sarah?" Delilah asked, hurrying to take his dripping coat. "She's with Mrs. Miller from the next farm. He ran a hand through his wet hair. "I don't even know why I came. I needed to talk to someone who might understand." Delilah led him to the fire, pressing a cup of hot coffee into his hands. "Tell me." "Today's the anniversary of when I met Martha," he said quietly. 14 years ago. We were so young, so full of dreams." He stared into the flames. "This morning, I found myself smiling at the memory, and then I felt this awful guilt, as if by feeling anything other than grief, I was betraying her." Delilah was quiet for a long moment. "I understand that guilt," she finally said. "The first time I laughed after Thomas died, I cried for an hour afterward. But I don't think our loved ones would want us to stop living, Elijah. Martha wouldn't want you to drown in sorrow. And there's something else," he continued, his voice rough with emotion. "Something I feel even more guilty about." Delilah waited, her eyes steady on his face. I've been thinking about you, Delilah. Not just as a friend or as Sarah's hair comber." He let out a shaky breath. "And that feels like the biggest betrayal of all." The confession hung in the air between them. Delilah's cheeks flushed, but she didn't look away. "Is it wrong," she asked softly, "to find comfort in someone who understands your pain? Is it wrong to want to feel something other than grief?" "I don't know," he answered honestly. "All I know is that when I'm with you, I feel like maybe, someday, I could be whole again. And that terrifies me." Delilah reached out slowly and took his hand. Her touch was warm and steady. "It terrifies me too. But I think Martha and Thomas would understand. They loved us. They would want us to find happiness again, even if it's not with them." Elijah looked down at their joined hands, at the way her smaller fingers fit perfectly between his larger ones. "I'm not ready to let go of Martha," he whispered. "I'm not asking you to," Delilah replied. "No one who truly loves you would ask that. Martha will always be part of you, just as Thomas will always be part of me. But perhaps," she squeezed his hand gently, "perhaps there's room in our hearts for both memories and new beginnings." They sat in silence for a long while, hands linked, watching the rain streak down the windows. When Elijah finally left to collect Sarah, something had shifted between them. Not a declaration, not a promise, but a tentative acknowledgement of possibilities neither had dared consider before. May brought warmer days and an abundance of wildflowers to the hills around Pine Creek. Elijah and Sarah's visits to Delilah became more frequent and often included walks through town or picnics by the creek when the shop wasn't busy. On one such outing, while Sarah splashed in the shallow water chasing minnows, Elijah and Delilah sat on a blanket in the dappled shade of an old cottonwood tree. "I've been thinking," Elijah said, watching his daughter's joyful exploration. "Sarah starts school in the fall. The ride from our homestead is too long for daily trips, especially in winter." "What will you do?" Delilah asked, weaving a crown of daisies. "I've been considering moving closer to town. Not right in it, I still need land for my horses, but near enough for Sarah to attend school easily." Delilah nodded, her nimble fingers continuing their work. "That sounds sensible. Have you found a suitable place?" "There's a property about a mile west of town, smaller than what we have now, but good pasture, a solid house." He hesitated. "I thought perhaps you might come see it with me. Give your opinion." She looked up, surprise and something else flickering in her eyes. "My opinion?" Elijah cleared his throat, suddenly nervous. "You have good taste, and Sarah values your judgment too." A smile touched Delilah's lips. "I'd be happy to see it." The following day, they rode out to the property together, Sarah chattering excitedly from her perch in front of her father on the horse. The house was indeed solid, a 2-story structure with a wide porch and large windows. The previous owner had left suddenly after receiving news of an inheritance back east, and much of the furniture remained. "It needs a woman's touch," Elijah said as they walked through the rooms, "but it has potential, don't you think?" Delilah ran her hand along a wooden banister, her expression thoughtful. "It's a lovely home, Elijah. Sarah would have her own room, and there's plenty of space for your work. The kitchen is spacious, too." "Do you like it, Miss Delilah?" Sarah asked, tugging at her hand. "Would you come visit us here if we lived in it?" "Of course I would, sweetheart." "You could visit all the time," Sarah continued enthusiastically. "You could even stay sometimes. We have extra rooms, and you could teach Pa more about hair and cooking and—" "Sarah," Elijah interrupted gently, seeing Delilah's flushed cheeks. "Let's not overwhelm Miss Delilah with plans." But as they walked the property line, watching Sarah run ahead to explore a small orchard, Elijah found himself imagining a future where Delilah's visits wouldn't be visits at all, where she would be a permanent presence in their home, in their lives. The thought both exhilarated and frightened him. On the ride back to town, Delilah was quieter than usual, her arms wrapped loosely around Elijah's waist as she sat behind him on the horse. He could feel the warmth of her against his back, and it stirred feelings he had thought long buried. "What are you thinking about so seriously?" he asked over his shoulder. There was a pause before she answered. "Life takes such unexpected turns. A year ago, I never would have imagined being here in this place, with you and Sarah. Do you regret coming to Pine Creek?" "No," she said firmly. "Despite everything, no. Meeting you both has been a blessing I didn't know to pray for." Her words warmed him more than the spring sunshine. At the edge of town, he helped her down from the horse, his hands lingering at her waist perhaps a moment longer than necessary. Their eyes met, and for a heartbeat, Elijah thought about how easy it would be to lean down and press his lips to hers. But Sarah was watching, and the middle of the road was no place for such a gesture. Instead, he squeezed Delilah's hand briefly before letting go. "Thank you for coming today," he said. "Your opinion means a great deal to me." "Will you buy it, Pa?" Sarah asked as they watched Delilah walk back to her shop. Elijah looked down at his daughter, then back at Delilah's retreating figure. "I believe I will, sweetheart. I believe I will." By early June, Elijah had made an offer on the property and begun the process of moving their belongings from the old homestead. The days were filled with work, but he still made time to visit Delilah, sometimes bringing Sarah, sometimes coming alone in the evenings after Sarah was asleep at Mrs. Miller's. On one such evening, they sat on the small porch behind Delilah's shop, watching fireflies rise from the grass as twilight deepened. Delilah had been teaching him to mend Sarah's clothes, and his fingers were sore from pricking them with the needle. "You're getting better," she encouraged, examining his uneven stitches on a torn pinafore. "Most fathers wouldn't even try. Most fathers probably have women folk around to help," he replied with a wry smile, "or they remarry quickly." As soon as the words left his mouth, a heavy silence fell between them. The unspoken possibility that had been growing over the past months suddenly seemed to fill the air. Delilah set the sewing aside, her eyes on the distant hills. "My sister writes that she's extending her stay in Denver," she said eventually. "She's met someone there, a widower with a dry goods store." "Do you think she'll marry him?" Elijah asked, sensing there was more to this conversation than Rebecca's potential match. "She's considering it. She's asked if I would want to buy her share of the shop if she decides to stay in Denver permanently." Elijah studied her profile in the fading light. "Is that what you want? To stay in Pine Creek and run the shop?" Delilah turned to face him, her expression open and vulnerable. "A few months ago, I wouldn't have had an answer. I came here because I had nowhere else to go, not because I was choosing a future." She took a deep breath. "But now there are reasons I might want to stay." The way she looked at him made his heart race. "Delilah," he began, then stopped, searching for the right words. "I'm not a poetic man. I can't offer pretty speeches, but I know that since meeting you, the world has color again. You've brought light back into our lives, mine and Sarah's." Delilah's eyes glistened in the dimness. You've done the same for me, Elijah. You and Sarah. You've helped me remember what it feels like to look forward to tomorrow. Slowly, carefully, Elijah reached for her hand. I don't want to rush this. We both carry deep loves in our hearts, and those don't fade easily. But I find myself thinking, hoping, that perhaps we could build something new together, not to replace what we've lost, but to honor it by finding joy again. A tear slipped down Delilah's cheek. I think I would like that very much. With gentle reverence, Elijah leaned forward and pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was tender, a promise rather than a passion, but it sent warmth flooding through him like a summer sunrise. When they parted, Delilah rested her forehead against his. We should take things slowly, she whispered, for Sarah's sake and for our own. Elijah nodded, bringing her hand to his lips. We have time. But time had other plans. 2 days later, Elijah was working on repairs at the new house when he heard a horse approaching at speed. It was Mrs. Miller's son, his face pale with urgency. Mr. Rawlings, you need to come quick. There's been an accident in town. Elijah's blood ran cold. Sarah? No, sir. Miss Porter. There was a runaway wagon. She pushed a child out of the way, but she couldn't get clear herself. The world seemed to tilt beneath Elijah's feet. Not again. Please, God, not again. He was on his horse in seconds, racing toward town with his heart in his throat. The crowd outside Dr. Bennett's office parted as he dismounted and rushed inside. Sarah was there, sitting quietly in a corner with Mrs. Miller, her face tear-stained but calm. She ran to him immediately. Pa, Miss Delilah got hurt, but Dr. Bennett says she's going to be all right. She saved little Tommy Wilson from getting squished by Mr. Peterson's wagon when his horses spooked. Relief made Elijah's knees weak. He hugged Sarah tightly, then looked to Dr. Bennett, who was washing his hands at a basin. How bad is it? He asked, his voice rough with fear. Broken leg, bruised ribs, and quite a knock to the head, the doctor replied. But Miss Porter is indeed going to recover, Mr. Rawlings. She was very fortunate. The wagon wheel just caught her side rather than rolling over her completely. Can I see her? Dr. Bennett nodded. She's been asking for you, in fact, but she's groggy from the pain medication, so keep it brief. Delilah lay pale against the white sheets of the examination room's narrow bed, her left leg splinted and elevated, a bandage around her forehead. But her eyes were open, and she managed a small smile when Elijah entered. You came, she whispered. Wild horses couldn't have kept me away. He took her hand gently, mindful of the bruises on her arm. You gave me quite a scare, Delilah Porter. I scared myself too, she admitted, but I couldn't let that child be hurt. Elijah's chest swelled with a complicated mixture of pride, tenderness, and lingering fear. You're a brave woman. Or a foolish one. She winced as she tried to shift position. Dr. Bennett says you'll recover fully, but it will take time. Elijah hesitated, then continued. He also says you'll need care. You can't be alone, especially with that leg, and with your sister away. A flicker of worry crossed Delilah's face. I hadn't thought about that. Perhaps I could hire someone. Or, Elijah interrupted, the idea that had been forming since he heard about the accident suddenly crystallizing into certainty. You could come stay with Sarah and me at the new house. It's nearly ready. There's a bedroom on the ground floor, so you wouldn't have to manage stairs. Surprise widened her eyes. Elijah, that's too much to ask. We agreed to take things slowly. This isn't about rushing our relationship, he assured her, though in his heart he knew it wasn't entirely true. It's about making sure you're properly cared for. Sarah adores you, and he swallowed hard. I couldn't bear to think of you struggling alone. Delilah was quiet for a long moment, her eyes searching his face. What would people say? They'd say I was helping a friend who helped my daughter when we needed it most. He squeezed her hand gently. But if propriety concerns you, Mrs. Miller could stay with us too, as a chaperone, at least until you're back on your feet. A small smile tugged at Delilah's lips despite her pain. You've thought this through rather quickly. When you care about someone, solutions come easily, he replied simply. Tears welled in her eyes. "I care about you too, Elijah Rawlings. You and Sarah both." She took a shaky breath. "If Mrs. Miller is willing to chaperone, then yes. Thank you." 2 days later, with Dr. Bennett's reluctant approval, Elijah brought Delilah to the new house. He had worked frantically to prepare it, with help from neighbors who had heard about Delilah's act of heroism. The downstairs bedroom was ready, with fresh curtains sewn by the ladies of the church and a vase of wildflowers on the bedside table. Sarah was beside herself with excitement, showing Delilah every corner of the house from her position in a wheelchair borrowed from the doctor. Mrs. Miller bustled about the kitchen, preparing a hearty stew and biscuits for their first meal together. That evening, after Sarah had been tucked into bed and Mrs. Miller had retired to her room, Elijah sat with Delilah on the porch, the summer night warm around them. He had carried her outside in her wheelchair so she could enjoy the stars. "How are you feeling?" he asked, noting the lines of pain around her eyes despite her smile. "Sore, but grateful." She reached for his hand. "This is a lovely home, Elijah. You and Sarah will be happy here." "We hope you'll be part of that happiness," he said quietly. "Not just while you're recovering, but after." Delilah's fingers tightened around his. "What exactly are you saying, Elijah Rawlings?" He took a deep breath, gathering his courage. "I know it hasn't been long. I know we both still carry grief. But sometimes life gives you a second chance at happiness, and you have to be brave enough to take it." He turned to face her fully. "I love you, Delilah Porter. I think I started falling in love with you the moment you offered to comb my daughter's hair, and nearly losing you before I could tell you. It made me realize I don't want to waste another day." Tears spilled down Delilah's cheeks, glinting in the moonlight. "I love you too," she whispered. "I've been afraid to admit it, afraid I was betraying Thomas's memory. But when that wagon was coming toward me, do you know what I thought about? Not just Sarah and the life I once had, but the future I might have with you. I wasn't ready to lose that possibility." Elijah leaned forward and kissed her, more fully than before, pouring all his relief and love and hope into the connection. When they parted, both breathless, he rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he said simply. "Not tomorrow, not next week. When you're healed, when you're ready. But promise me you'll be my wife, Sarah's mother, and I'll be the happiest man in the Colorado Territory." Delilah's smile was radiant through her tears. "Yes," she breathed. "Yes, I will marry you, Elijah Rawlings, and I will love you and Sarah with all my heart." From an upstairs window, unseen by the couple below, Sarah Rawlings watched with a smile on her young face. She had prayed every night since her mother died for someone to help her father smile again, to help with her hair, to make their broken family whole. And though she would never forget her mama, she knew in her heart that Miss Delilah was the answer to those prayers. The summer months passed in a blur of healing and preparation. Delilah's leg mended slowly but surely, and by August, she was able to walk with the aid of a cane. Mrs. Miller had returned to her own home after the first month, once Delilah could manage basic self-care, and propriety had been satisfied by Elijah's formal proposal, announced in church to the congregation's enthusiastic approval. Delilah sold her sister's shop to a young couple from Denver, Rebecca having decided to marry her widower and remain there, but kept a small sewing business going from the new house. Her wedding dress was her own creation, simple but elegant, adorned with lace she had saved from her mother's gown. On a perfect September day, with the aspen leaves turning gold in the mountains, Elijah Rawlings and Delilah Porter were married in the small church of Pine Creek. Sarah stood beside them, her hair perfectly combed and braided by Delilah that morning, a crown of wildflowers on her head. "You may kiss your bride," the preacher announced, and as Elijah leaned down to claim Delilah's lips, Sarah clapped her hands in delight. The congregation laughed and cheered, celebrating not just a union of two people, but the healing of two broken hearts and the creation of a new family. The reception was held at their home, with tables set up under the trees and lanterns hanging from branches. As twilight fell, Elijah found a moment alone with his new wife, drawing her away from the celebration to the quiet of their porch. Happy, Mrs. Rawlings? He asked, his arms encircling her waist. Completely, she answered, her eyes shining up at him. Though I admit there are moments I still feel a pang of guilt, as if I'm being disloyal to Thomas's memory. Elijah nodded, understanding perfectly. I feel the same about Martha sometimes. But then I look at how happy Sarah is, how she's flourishing with your love, and I know Martha would approve. Delilah leaned against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. I believe Thomas would too. He always said life was for the living. Wise man. He was. She looked up at her new husband, love evident in every line of her face. And so are you, Elijah Rawlings, for not giving up on happiness. They rejoined the party hand in hand, moving among their friends and neighbors with matching smiles. As the evening grew late, Sarah came to them, yawning but reluctant to leave the celebration. Time for bed, sweetheart, Elijah said, lifting her into his arms despite her protests that she was too old for such treatment. Can Mama Delilah tuck me in? She asked, the name still new and precious on her tongue. Delilah's heart swelled at the title. Of course I can, darling. Let's get you changed and I'll brush your hair. Together, the three of them climbed the stairs, a family created not from blood but from choice and love, and the simple act of kindness that had brought them together. Later that night, as Elijah and Delilah lay in each other's arms in the master bedroom, moonlight painting silver stripes across the quilt, he pressed a kiss to her temple. Do you know, he murmured, sometimes I think I should thank my clumsy hands for not being able to comb Sarah's hair properly. Delilah chuckled softly, her fingers tracing patterns on his chest. And I should thank my sister for leaving me in charge of her shop that day. It's strange, isn't it, how the worst times in our lives can lead us to the best people. Not strange, Delilah corrected, tilting her face up for his kiss. Just life, with all its unexpected turns. As spring turned to summer and summer to fall, the Rawlings household settled into a rhythm of love and daily life. Elijah's horse business prospered. Delilah's sewing was sought after throughout the county, and Sarah thrived under their combined care. Her hair was never tangled now, and she had learned to braid it herself under Delilah's patient tutelage. They honored the memories of those they had lost a visit to Martha's grave on her birthday, a special candle lit for Thomas and Emma on Christmas Eve, while embracing the joy of their present and the promise of their future. And when, a year after their wedding, Delilah placed Elijah's hand on her gently rounded belly, his eyes filled with wondering tears. The circle of their family would widen again, bringing new life from the ashes of old grief, just as their love had done. A baby, he whispered, awed. Our baby. Our family, Delilah corrected softly, as Sarah rushed to hug them both, her excitement filling the room with laughter. Life in the West was never easy. There would be harsh winters and dry summers, illnesses and hardships. But they would face them together, this family forged through loss and found in love, all because one day a father forgot to comb his daughter's hair, and a widow with a kind heart said, "Come here, sweetheart, let me try."